Shalom, shalom, Israel. We're back and we are talking about living for Him or living for the King. We're looking at four key aspects of the believer's life: their heart, their mind, their words, and their actions, and how we want to cultivate this so we can actually walk like Yahushua Messiah. And we've been talking about the Ruach, the role of the Ruach in the life of the believer, which is the Spirit. And in Corinthians chapter 12, it talks about 9 different types of manifestations of this same Spirit in the life of the believer that affect the mind, our words, and our actions. So we're going to start off by looking at having the mind of Messiah and these gifts that deal with having the mind of Messiah, like the word of knowledge, word of wisdom, and discerning of spirits or spirit. And this is really critical to be able to be the believer we're called to be. And I'd like to read a verse that kind of syncs these three aspects together. It says this: "By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. And by knowledge the rooms are filled with all the precious and pleasant riches." So we see that wisdom, understanding, which is discernment, and knowledge, a house is built up and furnished and established. And these three things work together. And we're going to talk about building up our spiritual body, and collectively as the body of Messiah, we're being built up as well. And the knowledge is the part that actually fills up the house. So when we're thinking about building up ourselves and the body, we have to start with knowledge, and the knowledge of the Word. We read in the book of Isaiah that his people went into exile because they rejected knowledge, and we find out what that knowledge was. It was the Torah, the written instructions of Yah. Also in the book of Hosea, it says, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge." And again, we find out that knowledge that they were perishing because they rejected his Torah. They actually rejected knowledge. And he was going to forget their children. So throughout the scripture, it tells us about what knowledge is. It says that knowledge goes out of the mouth of Yah. And we need to have this knowledge written on our heart. And that's the job of the Ruach. We read in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah that the renewed covenant is all about Yah writing the Torah on our heart and our minds, that we can actually walk it out and do it. So one of the very first things we need to do is start having the mind of Messiah, get into His Word, start reading it, start meditating it, chew on it. And this means kind of like a cow that kind of keeps chewing and chewing, goes over and over and over it again to where it becomes part of our actual nature. And this is kind of huge for the life of the believer, because a lot of times you'll hear people, and I've heard different ministers, try to separate the Word from the Spirit. But Messiah specifically said in John 4 that the Father is Spirit. He desires those who worship Him to worship Him in spirit and in truth. See, the Spirit and truth go together. And that's why it's called the Spirit of Truth, to lead us and guide us in all truth. So the first layer of that is actually to be able to understand what the written Word says. A lot of people have mental blocks, or the enemy has come against them so they can't understand what they're reading. The Spirit of Truth is going to guide you and be able to give you understanding and insight to actually what this Word is saying, and the things that you're hearing. When you hear the Word, you're going to be able to understand it. We see that it even goes beyond even the truth, because it says the Torah is truth in Psalm 119, 142. But in John 16:13, he says the Spirit will guide us in all truth. So that goes even beyond what we see written here, and it deals with the believer's very personal life. We see the prophet, for example, a good example of this is where the prophet Nathan gives a word of knowledge, a very specific word of what's going on right now, to David about his relationship with Bathsheba and killing Uriah, and basically gave him a parable and said he was the man. And that's a perfect example of a word of knowledge. We also see Peter, when he had the vision of these animals and things like that, that the Spirit told him that 3 men were at the door, and he needed to go with them. And so these are examples of in our very personal life where the Spirit will tell us something to go a certain way, to do something, not to do something. But we need to be able to have our grounding in the Word, because if we don't know this, we may be led astray by a different spirit. We got to test the spirits and see if it lines up with this Word and get used to practicing hearing the voice of Yah. And in the book of Hebrews, it tells us that the people that are mature, I'll just turn there here real quick, in chapter 5 of the book of Hebrews, here we go, it says this, and this is kind of important because a lot of people, although we start off with the milk of the Word, we need to develop, because that milk is for babes. And this is in Hebrews 5, verse, let's see here, I can't even see that. I think that's 13. And for everyone partaking of milk is inexperienced in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food is for the mature, those whose senses have been trained by practice to discern both good and evil. So, and we'll be talking about this when we talk about discernment, but we got to be in the Word to be able to even discern or to know what is knowledge, because or what is good knowledge. I'll put it that way, because in the book of Daniel it tells us knowledge will increase, and really we need to be able to choose what is right, because although knowledge is increasing, like the book of Timothy says, always learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. See, in the book of Luke, it tells us that there were people that were taking the key of knowledge away from the people. The key of knowledge is actually the Torah. It's the written word of Elohim. When we add to it, like in Messiah's day, the Pharisees and a lot of people were adding to the word, it was diminishing from the written, unadulterated word of Elohim. In our day, a lot of people have also taken away from the word. A lot of churches say this word's done away with. Well, that takes away the key, the entry to the kingdom. And it's very important that we do not add to or take away from the word. Messiah says, my words are spirit and they are life. And we see this in the Proverbs as well. It says that this word is life. And the very first thing we need to do to be able to have any other the spiritual gifts is basically fill our hearts and our minds up with knowledge. And when he speaks a specific word of knowledge in our life, then we'll be able to tell if it's from him or from the enemy and be able to walk accordingly. I hope that helps, just clarifying. This is a short little introduction into the word of knowledge. And I will say one more thing. You could think of the written word as the railroad track and the spirit as kind of like a train on the track. The two go together. If the train derails from the track, it's going to cause a lot of problems. We have to have the track and we need to have the spirit to get things moving. So the two go together. Remember that the Father has called us to worship him in spirit and in truth. And what Yah has put together, let no man separate. Till next time, shalom.